Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. As part of a comprehensive news analysis, today we'll be discussing 5 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper, Delhi edition. Before we begin, some announcements for you. We are available on Telegram, so do download the app via the QR code given here or the link given in the description below. There are also some offline workshops which have been lined up for you. So one in Chennai, thereafter Hyderabad, in New Delhi and Lucknow, and I encourage you to go there and interact with the teachers and understand the whole Byjus process. Then the last announcement is that today we have an explained session by Harshmeet sir, which will be discussing about the Chief of Defence Staff. So it's an interesting topic. So I would expect you to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss any of these videos and also attend the session in that regard. So let us begin an analysis for today. So we start with a very interesting topic which is called moonlighting, and this is a new term which was there in the news, and generally today's newspaper tries to analyze it, and in the context of the gig economy and generally GS paper 3, it becomes important to understand what is moonlighting. It can easily come as a prelims question, and the mains examination they can ask you the larger concept itself. So what is moonlighting? Moonlighting, very simply, before we go into the text itself, is that whenever you are working from home, you have more time with you because you're not traveling. So what happened during the work from home period was that people were not working for just their employer but for other people also. So when you're getting remuneration other than your own employer's remuneration, it is called moonlighting, that you have multiple employments at one point of time. One may be your main employment, the main employer, and thereafter you could have side works and side projects in that regard. So moonlighting is nothing but working at multiple places at the same point of time, and this became a very important concept during the COVID-19 pandemic period and in the work from home period. And what the article tries to point out is that when we talk about moonlighting, there is no specific legislation or labor law against double employment, and in that context there is a lot of gaps and lacuna in which the courts can interpret this whole concept, and we'll try to understand what are the basic judgments which help or support an employee and how does it go about talking about how the employer should respond. So during the pandemic, those with desk jobs had more time in their hands because there was no traveling, they were at home. So thus it made it easier for them to take other projects or projects outside of their main work. And moonlighting, or this is the exact definition, employees working for remuneration with entities other than their employers, has been a hot topic in recent months. And as I said, because there's no specific law, it becomes interesting to understand. So moonlighting is a state where employees work for remuneration with entities other than their employers, and there is no specific statute in India which talks about this. And these enactments though deal with double employment, they are generally dealing with factory employment. Therefore there's a lot of scope for interpretation and misinterpretation of the laws given as of right now. So the first act which talks about, so I hope that moonlighting is totally clear. Moonlighting, as I said, is one person having the main employer, maybe Infosys, Wipro, but because you have too much time and because you're not traveling, you're at home, and because you're in the comfort of your home, you have more time for more projects. A Wipro or a Infosys employee would take other projects elsewhere as freelance work, therefore having what we call as multiple employment opportunities and multiple employment projects. So it is section 60 of the Factories Act which actually deals with the concept of double employment. It deals with restriction on double employment, stating that no adult worker shall be required or allowed to work in any factory on any day on which he has already been working in any other factory, save in such circumstances as may be prescribed. So this is a very important concept. It is saying that the worker cannot be allowed and cannot work in another factory in the same day when he is working in a separate factory. So if he's working on one factory, he can't work in another factory in the same day. This is called double employment, and this enactment, however, is only applicable on factory workers. Therefore, in the context of IT jobs, they are technically not factory workers. This section 60 doesn't work. But you can see that when it comes to colonial legislations itself, we have a very specific concept that double employment is not good. Double employment should not be allowed because then you're cheating one of the employers. So when we talk about the concept, it's very simple. Multiple employments, you were at home, pandemic does not allow you to go anywhere, so you took up multiple projects, you can increase your income, but now the employer is trying to find a solution to this problem, and basically the Factories Act is not of any purpose to us here. So we've understood the concept of moonlighting. Now we're trying to understand how do we place it in the larger labor law or the labor law regime in India. However, the more relevant judgment in this regard is actually the Glaxo Laboratories Limited versus Labor Court, Meerut and others, in which the apex court actually, the Supreme Court actually said the following line, and I quote, "The employers has hardly any extraterritorial jurisdiction." So it only has jurisdiction within the employment itself. He is not the custodian of general law and other situations or the guru or the mentor of his workmen for their well-regulated cultural advancement, saying that the employer is not the custodian, neither is he the guru or the mentor of the workmen, so as to lead to their cultural advancement and cultural development. Therefore, their jurisdiction is confined to the premises of the employer. And if the power to regulate the behavior of the workmen outside the duty hours or at any place wherever they may be was conferred upon the employer, contract of service may be reduced to contract of slavery. And this is an interesting point which the Supreme Court makes. It says that okay, you have control over the employee within the confines of the wall of your premises, but if we give you the right to control the behavior or even well-regulated cultural advancement after duty hours, in that regard would mean that the contract of service would become contract of slavery. This is a very important point. Outside the duty hours, the employer is just a nobody, not an entity which has any control over the employee himself. And this is a very important point. This judgment very clearly states that if we allow the employer to dictate what happens outside the premises and outside working hours, we are technically reducing the employee to a slave. So the concept of slavery comes in. So moonlighting is subject to law of the land, and when we talk about the law of the land and this judgment, we see that there's a pro-employee stance in that regard. The sphere of employment cannot be extended by the employer beyond working hours and outside his place of employment, which is the principle laid down by the above judgment. And this is the basic point, that you cannot talk about control beyond the place and the hours. In other words, the employees can choose to arrange his affairs as he pleases beyond the working hours of the employer. So basically, the employer has no real control what the employee does after working hours. Therefore, moonlighting in a way is working in a lacuna space where it is allowed to happen because there is no law which states otherwise. So moonlighting technically is not illegal because beyond working hours, the Supreme Court says that the employee is free to do whatever he wants. Therefore, what has happened is that the courts of law in India which deal with employment, which are the writ courts and the labor courts, they would most probably, if this issue gets escalated to courts, give a pro-employee stance or a pro-employee judgment than a pro-employer judgment, and these courts exercise jurisdiction based on equity or fairness. Therefore, the courts may lean in favor of employee unless there is a contravention which leads to serious prejudice or loss of the employer. So it is a major point which the article is making, which is that till there's no major loss to the employer, till though no secret is going out, till there's no bias, the employee will always have an upper hand in that regard, that the labor courts themselves will never give a judgment which will be pro-employer. Though we have these spaces and though we are operating in these spaces, what has been the approach generally till this point, because there's no specific law in that regard, and we get a glimpse of what the basic approach is by the Wipro chairman Rishad Premji, who has argued that it is just plain and simple cheating, and Wipro actually sacked 300 employees when they discovered that their employees were working for rival firms, leading to conflict of interest. And Infosys has also warned its staff against moonlighting, stating that it could lead to termination. Before we go to the second topic, what is this concept? See, for the prelims examination, they can easily ask you what is moonlighting, or they could give you this term and ask you what is it related to. Second, in the mains examination, this is a very important zone where there is a lot of confusion because there is no specific law. The law is related to factories. Double employment is technically not banned or is not illegal. Moonlighting works within a sphere which is totally legal. Thereafter comes the Supreme Court judgment which says that beyond working hours of the employer, employee is free to do whatever he wants to. If there is any form of control, it will then amount to slavery. Therefore, the moonlighting concept is within the rights of the employee. So therefore, for the examination, remember the word moonlighting. You remember how it can be asked in the mains examination, and also remember that it is, as of right now, a space in which law is needed. So we'll see how this concept develops further. Though the companies are very clear, if they're finding multiple employees doing multiple employment, they are terminating them, but technically that is illegal, and if this goes to court, maybe there will be a law or there will be a form of intervention from the government, but the government should intervene even before this escalates to the courts. So moonlighting, a new concept, something new to understand today, and I hope that you understand this word moonlighting totally, and more than that, you can now use it in any context, be it GS paper 3, GS paper 2, or generally in your essay paper. This was one of the byproducts of the pandemic, and in the pandemic we saw that these new type of concepts have now become a space in which we need laws, because this is the new reality in which we live in. Now let's move to the second topic, which is related to defense, which is the light combat helicopter called Prachand, a very interesting name given to it. And Prachand in that concept was a new breakthrough in our defense technology. It is a totally indigenously developed helicopter, and the need for Prachand comes from the Kargil war, which happened in 1999. And the article technically talks about how this defense technology can change the military paradigm in India, and how it can also lead to this helicopter becoming the mainstay for the army. It's an army specific helicopter, and its capabilities can go up till Siachen. Therefore, it's a new breakthrough in our military technology. So it is an indigenously developed light combat helicopter called Prachand, meaning fierce, and it has been formally inducted into the Indian Air Force at Jodhpur on Monday, and the multi-role helicopter has been customized as per the requirements of the Indian Armed Forces, specifically for desert terrain and high altitude sectors. And for GS paper 3 again becomes important. Remember, why is that this Prachand is very important? Prachand is important because the concept came out during the Kargil war, where we saw that we did not have the capability to hit precisely at high altitudes. So the LCH project can be traced back to the 1999 Kargil war, when the armed forces felt a need for a dedicated platform capable for operating at high altitudes and delivering precise strikes, as the existing attack choppers could not effectively hit the targets when it was at the height of Kargil or Tiger Hill in that regard. And in October of 2006, the government sanctioned the design and development of the LCH, and the Indian Army joined the program in 2013. And Hull, which even is producing as of right now the LCA, which is the light combat aircraft, then built 4 LCHs, which is light combat helicopters, prototypes with close to 1600 flights and 1239 flight hours, and all this testing has culminated into the LCH Prachand. Now, how is the LCH Prachand a game changer? It's a game changer because of its capabilities. It is powered by twin Shakti engines, which was a collaborative development between Hull and France's Safran company. And the LCH is a 5.8 ton class combat helicopter with potent ground attack and aerial combat capabilities. The helicopter can fly at a maximum speed of 288 kilometers. More than that, it has a combat radius of 500 kilometers. And this is what is the game-changing aspect. It can go up to 21,000 feet, which makes it very ideal for operation in Siachen. It incorporates several stealth features such as reduced radar infrared signatures, crashworthy features from improvement in survivability, armored protection systems, and night attack capabilities. And as a first, the LCH is the only attack helicopter in the world that can land and take off at an altitude of 5,000 meters, 16,400 feet. This capability is very important when it comes to Siachen and Kargil sector, and it can also have air to ground and air to air combat missiles which can be used in any form of warfare. So why is the LCH important? LCH, as much as it is a light combat helicopter, it is a helicopter which we can use in two sectors which are in dire need of helicopters, which is the Siachen sector and the Kargil sector. Over and above that, we have now tried to introduce stealth features, and over and above that, the LCH is a game changer, because when we talk about the importance for the army, it can be deployed to assume air defense, anti-tank roles in high altitude, counter-insurgency, search and rescue operations, and can be equipped with advanced technologies which can destroy enemy air defense and generally their capabilities which are on the ground. And the combat search and rescue feature, which is a CSAR bunker busting operation, and the counter-insurgency operations which it can do in jungles and urban areas, makes it a new dawn in our air technology and in our military technology. So though this topic is very, very small, it's very interesting, because Prachand at the end of the day is the new game-changing equipment we have, because it can be used at very high altitude. When it comes to the Kashmir Valley, when it comes to Jammu sector, when it comes to Kargil sector, when it comes to Siachen, now we can hit precisely where we want to, up capability which we didn't have in 1999, and therefore it is the development which started in 2006 which has now culminated in 2022 as the most important indigenously developed light combat aircraft. For the examination, they can easily ask you what is Prachand, and you need to know for the mains examination how it can change our approach in high altitude warfare and military technology. Now let's move to the third topic, which is linked to CSR framework and CSR funding. Corporate social responsibility is an interesting topic, because corporate social responsibility is based on the concept that all corporates, all companies take something from the environment, take something from us. Therefore, it is their responsibility to give back to the society and to the environment in that regard. But what the author is technically trying to point out is that this framework needs a complete overhaul, because there are too many loopholes and there are a lot of problems in that regard. And therefore, when it comes to how much spending is happening, which is 2% stipulated under the law, and over and above that, in what sector they should be putting it, is now under question. So ever since the establishment of corporate social responsibility under section 135 of the Companies Act of 2013, the CSR spending in India has increased from 10,000 crores, close to 10,000 crores in 2014-15 to 24,000 crores in 2020-21. So it has nearly doubled within 5 years. Therefore, it is a major spending which all corporates do. However, there is no verifiable data to argue that this increase is commensurate with the increase in profits of Indian and foreign industries or companies here. So we can't actually argue that though their CSR spending has doubled, has the foreign companies which have a registered arm in India or the Indian companies actually doubled their production. That is why CSR has doubled. So there's no correlation between these two, and the problem is that we don't have data to correlate it also. However, the problem runs even more deep. Before we go to CSR and what is the concept of 2%, let's try to understand who is eligible for CSR. CSR funding rules under Section 135 of Companies Act says that any company which has annual turnover of more than 1,000 crores is eligible to spend 2% of its net profit in the past 3 years, or it has net worth of 500 crores, or it has 5 crores as its net profit. So if you have annual turnover of close to 1,000 crores or net worth of 500 crores or net profit of 5 crores, thereafter you become eligible to spend 2% of average net profits in the past 3 years. So let's keep this static portion with us, because this is going to become important in order to understand the data I'm now going to provide. You don't have to learn the data, but remember 1,500 or 5 crores, if you become eligible for CSR spending, we need to know, are the companies increasing, decreasing? And this is what this article is giving us. According to the author, when he's talking about the problems, there were 2,926 companies which actually did not pay any CSR, zero spend in CSR, therefore they don't fall under these categories. Further, the companies which were actually spending less than prescribed limit of 2% rose from 3,000 to 3,200 between 2015 and 2020. Therefore, though the number of CSR spending has increased, it has doubled, the number of companies which are paying zero CSR is close to 3,000, and over and above that, the number of companies which are paying less than 2%, which is below the prescribed limit, is also increasing. More than that, there was a decline in the number of companies participating in CSR from 25,000 in 2019 to 17,000 in 2021. This is again very, very discouraging and very, very alarming that, see, CSR spending is based on specific turnovers, net worth or profit. Now the problem here is that the numbers are indicating that doubling is not based on growth within companies, but rather one company contributing more. So less than 2%, the prescribed limit is 2%, less than 2%, that is also increasing. The companies which are not paying anything is also close to 3,000. And over and above that, in absolute numbers, the number of companies participating in the CSR program have also decreased. So therefore, the decreasing trend in companies and the increasing trend in CSR is a contradictory story in itself. So when it comes to CSR spending itself, there's an alarm bell which needs to be raised right now, because the companies which are not prescribing to the limit are also big, and the number of companies which have actually been contributing to CSR has also declined. Therefore, there is a systemic issue in CSR spending. Therefore, we need to do something about this. If a company spends an amount in excess to 2% as stipulated, the excess amount is liable to be then set off in the successive 3 fiscal years. But what is even more interesting is, besides, many private companies have registered their own foundations and trust to which they transfer statutory CSR budgets for utilization. It is unclear if it is allowed under the CSR rules or not. Now this is even more interesting, that Infosys, Wipro, these big companies organize their own trusts which are known for doing philanthropic work. Now we don't know, does this count as CSR? The money should go to an organization which is other than the company itself, but if it is being spent on their own trust, then isn't it utilized within the same company itself? Therefore, when we talk about the absolute numbers, it's alarming because it is decreasing. When we talk about the way they are spending, it is also via trusts which are established by them, therefore creating a conflict of interest in itself. And when we talk about CSR frameworks itself, there is a lot of gaps in that regard. So the first two provisions of section 135(5) of the Act is that companies should give preference to local areas and areas around it where it operates. So this spending should happen close to where it is. However, a report by Ashoka University has pointed out that 54% of CSR companies are concentrated in Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and Gujarat, which receives the largest number of CSR also, while the populous states such as UP and MP receive little. So there is geographical bias also, that there are more companies doing CSR in specific states where CSR spending is more, but they technically don't need CSR spending. The companies where they need to be in UP or in MP or in Bihar, where the CSR spending should happen, they are not there. So item 4 of the schedule 7 of the Act deals with broader environmental issues to create a countervailing effect. It says that because companies damage the environment, their spending should also be concentrated in the environmental sector. However, an analysis of the CSR spending in 2014-2018 period reveals that most of the CSR is being spent into education, 37%. Only 9% was spent on environment, even as extractive industries such as mining, functioning in an environmentally detrimental manner in several states was there. So basically, though there are companies such as the mining companies which are environmentally extractive companies, they are also not spending more on the environment but more on education and health and sanitation, which is also alarming, because the concept of CSR was, yes, it's social responsibility, but it is also environmental responsibility, and the zone which should get the most amount of spending is getting the least. A major issue with the design is that it focuses on output rather than quality of this expenditure and its impact. So it is not technically seeing how is the money spent, they're just checking is the money spent or not. The Standing Committee on Finance had observed that the information regarding CSR spending by companies is insufficient and is difficult to access itself. And when we talk about how to move forward, we have now identified three major problems. First, the companies are reducing, there's a decline in the numbers. Second, environment which should get a major chunk of the CSR is not getting it. Third, there's a geographical bias, well-off states is getting more CSR and the states which need it are not getting it. So how do we move forward? And this is what is important for the examination. You can use this data in mains examination. Very interesting question can come about the CSR framework, how can it be removed, and there's a lot of valuable way forwards here which will write it in the exam. So first, there's a need to curate a national level platform centralized by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, MCA, where all states should list their potential CSR admissible projects so that companies can assess whether their CSR funds would be most impactful across India, with of course preferential treatment to areas where they operate. And this is the basic point. First, the state should create a list of CSR worthy projects, and the companies can choose from these projects that yes, this project if we put in, the impact is going to be good. Companies need to prioritize environmental restoration in the areas where they operate, earmarking at least 25% for environmental regeneration. All CSR projects should be selected and implemented with an active involvement of communities, district administration, and public representatives. And more than that, a high-level committee which was established in 2018 argued that the current CSR framework should be improved by increasing more monitoring and evaluation regime. So basically you need to improve the existing monitoring and evaluation regime, which also includes strengthening the reporting mechanism with enhanced disclosures about how the project was selected. The implementing agency bringing CSR within the purview of a statutory fiscal audit with the details of CSR spending, including the financial statements of the company, mandatory independent third party impact assessment audits. So what are the way forwards? First, we need to make sure that states create their own list. Second, environmental damage should be one of the most important regenerative projects which they should do. Third, all stakeholders should be taken together, and what the high level committee in 2018 said was that reporting mechanism should be better. How CSR is spent is also important, where is it spent is important, and third party fiscal audits are equally important. So before we move on to the fourth topic, let's try to understand what have we understood till this point. This is the first summary of the first three topics. First, we tried to understand what is the concept of moonlighting. Moonlighting is multiple employments by a single employee, and when he has a principal employer itself. So an Infosys employee taking 5-6 other projects in different companies is called moonlighting. It was a byproduct of the pandemic and itself has a lot of problematic aspects when it comes to labor regime, because there's no law related to it. The companies are terminating employees, but the law itself does not state that the employee cannot work in multiple places. The Supreme Court has also created precedents about it. The second topic which we did was LCH Prachand. Prachand is very, very important for us because it's a light combat helicopter which can be used at high altitude. It has been curated for the use for the army and has now become a new milestone in our indigenously developed military technology. And this topic, which is CSR spending, is much more mains oriented in that regard because it talks about how CSR spending has doubled. However, the numbers are showing that the companies are reducing, the companies are not complying, and over and above that there's a geographical bias because the states which should get the CSR spending are not getting it. More than that, the way forward is to technically have a much better framework in which the state is more involved. Auditing is done better in that regard. So these three topics dealt with CSR, defense technology, and the concept of moonlighting, very important for prelims and mains. And now we can move on to the World Bank's projection about our economic growth, which is equally important in the context of what is happening in South Asia at this point of time. So it is very, very important for GS paper 3 was on the front page itself. The World Bank has trimmed the estimate for India's growth in the current fiscal year 2022-23 to 6.5% from 6.6% previously. And as compared to last year, we were in the same quarter at 8.7% growth, but this time we are not reaching that. We are still stuck up in that 6 to 6.5% sector. So 1 percentage point lower than what it had previously projected in June, and compared to the last fiscal year in this quarter, we have seen a decline. And this is based on the persistent pressures, and this is why it becomes important for the examination, this concept of persistent pressures which have been exerted on the South Asian economy, which is making sure that growth is becoming a little bit dampened. So when we look at the basic data itself, it is showing us that 2020 and first quarter of 2021, which is the pandemic period, we see even negative growth at this point of time. But Q2 last year was 8.75%, which is a major jump, but that is also because of the fact that we were recovering out totally of the pandemic. And compared to that, this Q2 is not that strong, but it is still in the 6 to 6.5% area. And overall for this fiscal year, it has reduced it from 6.6% to 6.5%. So the Indian economy is expected to speed up to 7% in the next fiscal year before settling back to the 6.1% in 2024-25. So 23 to 24 we will reach 7% and then come back again to 6%. These estimates were released under the twice yearly South Asian Economic Focus report, which is released by the World Bank, and this time it was titled Coping with Shocks, Migration and the Road to Resilience. And with Sri Lanka's economic crisis, devastating floods in Pakistan, recovery from the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, the recovery of this region has not been very, very even. And it further points out that when we talk about different sectors in South Asia, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka and Pakistan, poverty will increase in 2022 because of what is happening there. In India, the slowing in India's growth during the current fiscal year is actually relative to the previous one, is mostly because of the fact that last year was about COVID recovery. So because everything was negative and we came out of the pandemic, there was a major push in growth, but now that is flatlining. So basically it increased quite quickly, but it is flatlining because now that recovery was needed in 2022 for the first fiscal, and therefore 21-22 fiscal, that shows that recovery, and thereafter it is now flatlining, it is now stagnating. The impact of the Russia-Ukraine war, the global monetary tightening, high commodity prices, interest rates have also not helped to what India is trying to achieve. Manufacturing and service has been expanding in India since January, and it is growing at a rate faster than the rest of the world itself, and this is very encouraging in that regard. With the relaxation of COVID restrictions, economic activity has picked up, and the demand in the contact intensive sectors has also picked up. So what we can see is that India is truly coming out of the pandemic hit economy, and service and construction sector have expanded the fastest on production side, and the report said that private demand has grown year on year, but this was largely due to low base effect. Base effect meaning because the base was based in a negative period in the COVID pandemic period, therefore it is showing growth, but it's technically no growth. Because of the base effect, in the second quarter of 2021, the economy was reeling under the Delta wave. So that is showing growth, but it is technically no growth. So 2021, the base is actually in the Delta wave. Therefore, now what we see is growth, but that is not true growth because the base effect, which is the base is last year was already negative because of a COVID-19 pandemic and the Delta wave itself. So before we move on to the last topic, this is an interesting concept. First and foremost thing is, in South Asia, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan and Pakistan will see major economic issues and poverty should return back in these areas. India, we are seeing a proper recovery out of the pandemic itself, but the point is that because of the fact that all development which could happen after the pandemic has already happened, now our growth is flatlining, it is stagnating in that regard, and it does not help the fact that the world is at war at this point of time. Inflation generally has hit all across the world, but the only good thing which we see out of this report is that our manufacturing and service sector is growing faster than the rest of the world, and the low base effect is also giving us an illusionary picture in certain sectors which should become better maybe by the next fiscal. We are hovering in the 6 to 7% growth rate sector, and we should be encouraged by the fact that all across the world that is not the case, but India can push further, India can go forward in that regard. And with this, let's enter our last topic, which is the Nobel Prize in Literature, a very small topic but important for prelims itself. The French author Annie Ernaux, known for her deceptive, simple novels drawing on personal experience, has led her to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. 82-year-old, she was honored for the courage and the clinical audacity with which she uncovered the roots, estrangements and collective restraints of personal memory. What is more relevant for you for the examination is that what genre does she fall into. So she has produced more than 20 books, many of which have now been prescribed in schools in France, and one most important feature about her writing was that she used to give a subtle but insightful window into the social life of modern France. And what has been the major source of her storytelling is that personal experience are the sources of her own works, and she falls into the category of auto-fiction, which gives her narrative a form of real life experience. And this is the basic point, which is the concept of auto-fiction. This is a new genre which we are seeing, and she is one of the pioneers in that. So before we move to the mains question, let's try to summarize everything we've done today. First, we understood the concept of moonlighting. The concept of moonlighting very simple, which is that one person working at multiple places, no real law. Now the laws which exist are for factory workers. IT companies have been very heavy-handed. We have a judgment which says that you can't control a person outside working hours. Therefore, it becomes a form of slavery. So when we talk about the laws which could come further, we need to keep it in mind that workers have the right to do whatever they want after working hours. Second topic which we did was Prachand. Prachand, a very important light combat helicopter which allows the Indian Army now to operate in high altitude combat zones, and over and above that the need came from the 1919 Kargil war where we did not have the capability. Then we discussed the CSR framework in India and how there is a major contradiction in the way CSR spending is increasing but the companies involved are decreasing. There is a geographical bias with regards to where the money is going. There is no framework for monitoring. We don't look at the quality of spending, we look at the quantity of spending. Therefore, we need to expand on that also, introduce a framework which is better and can take into account different aspects related to how CSR should be spent, and the concept that a lot of companies are not spending close to 2% and that needs to change also. Then we moved on to the concept of what the World Bank is saying about our economy. The World Bank very simply is saying that yes, India is recovering, but its growth will dampen by 24-25. South Asia is in turmoil at this point of time. India is the best performing in that regard. Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Pakistan will see poverty coming back and their growth has been impacted quite a lot. And India, manufacturing and service sector is growing the best in the world. But as I said, low base effect, the concept of base effect, that because we have most of the bases in the negative period of the pandemic, it could be an illusionary growth story. We need to see if this persists thereafter, and thereafter the Nobel Prize in Literature, which we discussed with regards to Ernaux, how she talks about the autofiction genre and how she told us a story of fictional characters through her own personal life stories. With this, let's look at the mains question. First, what is moonlighting? How does the current labor regime deal with it. It's a very interesting question, very easy to answer. Then the corporate social responsibility framework needs complete overhaul. Discuss. This is about how the existing order is not good enough. With this, I would like to end the session. Thank you so much for your patience. I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.